the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Buckeyes for the Locked On Podcast Network. What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Buckeyes for the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. It is Tuesday, August 17th in the year 2021. And no matter if you're listening to the audio version of the podcast or if you're watching us on YouTube, I want to thank you for making Locked On Buckeyes a part of your day. On today's episode, we will be joined by Mr. Matt Youmans. He is the senior editor of VSiN, or the Vegas Sports Information Network, as well as the host of My Guys in the Desert as well. Matt and I talk Big Ten football, what VSiN provides, and a whole lot more. One of the things that I love is when a national host, a national voice, loves Big Ten football. Not just loves and saying, oh, I love it, but they're not knowledgeable about the sport and about the teams inside the football conference, but they're very knowledgeable of it and they love it as well. That is Matt Youmans. Learned that very quickly before we recorded this here interview, this here conversation, and I can't wait for you guys to enjoy what I enjoyed at the end of last week. So I'm going to back away, bring in Mr. Matt Youmans, and allow him to talk about VSiN and Big Ten football. And joining us now here on Locked On Buckeyes, it is Matt Youmans. He is one of the voices you will hear on My Guides in the Desert on VSiN, on the SiriusXM side of things. Also, he's the editor of VSiN, Vegas Sports and Information Network as well. Matt, how you doing?
Hey, doing great, man. Always look forward to talking Big Ten football, so let's fire away, man.
Exactly. But before we get to the Big Ten football, the Ohio State stuff, I'm sure there's a lot of listeners or people watching on YouTube that have never heard of VSiN, the Vegas Sports and Information Network. Could you help us describe and tell us what that network is all about?
Well, it's the sports betting version of ESPN, basically. That's what we strive to be. And if you listen to our shows, everything is talked about from a sports betting perspective. You're not going to hear us debate who's greater, Michael Jordan or LeBron. You know, we don't get into hot takes or things like that. We're just trying to analyze sports from a betting perspective. I think a more intelligent perspective, not such you don't get the soap opera themes and some of the garbage you get on some of the mainstream networks. And also we put out a weekly magazine, Point Spread Weekly, which is basically, I say, like the sports betting version of Sports Illustrated. You know, we write everything. We handicap the games, everything from a betting perspective. So that's what we are. We analyze things and try to give you, I guess, angles or tips that will improve your sports handicapping. Because, Jay, obviously sports betting is taking off in this country right now, and that's an understatement.
Yeah, it's definitely taking off. And I never thought, I call myself young. I'm in my early 30s. I never thought that sports betting would be as big as it is, as quickly as it's taken over so
Right.
many conversations in America and sports in general. It is nice to have networks like VSiN that help, and they help people and that are looking for information like this. And Matt, you guys, like you mentioned, don't give off the generic or garbage, as you said, type of storylines that really a lot of people don't care about. They care about the meat, potatoes a lot of times, or the highlights variety, or the sports betting information that you guys provide.
Yeah, no question. That's our niche. I'll tell you what, to follow up on your first statement there, by the way, you are young, early 30s. That's very young. I'm almost 50, so there you go. I graduated from a Big Ten school in the early 90s, so there you go. But, I was at the NFL meetings, I'm going to say 5 years ago, 4.5, 5 years ago, and I had trouble. I was representing the Las Vegas market at that time. I had trouble getting a question into Roger Goodell. They didn't want to take my question because they knew it was going to be gambling oriented. And at that point, we were talking about the Raiders moving from Oakland to Las Vegas. And it was a sensitive topic, and the NFL did not want to even touch the gambling topic. Look at it now, Jay.
Yeah.
You've got NFL franchises teaming up, doing partnerships with sports books. You've got the Superdome named after Caesars right now. Yeah, it's just obviously it was an untapped revenue stream that I think professional sports leagues ignored for a while and realized, hey, once the NHL kind of knocked the door down in Las Vegas and brought the Golden Knights here and realized what a great market it could be, and the sports betting is not, not evil or taboo, things have started to take off. And obviously that all happened with that Supreme Court decision about 3.5 years ago. So I think it's a great way. It really opens your mind up a little bit when you start to analyze games from a betting perspective. You start to look at the point spread and different player props and things you can bet. I know that a lot of people who listen to our network find it fascinating at times. So I'm ready to talk Big Ten football whenever you are.
I bet you are. Big Ten football, Ohio State football. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of interesting things to discuss in regards to the football side of things. But when it comes to the sports betting side of things, what are some, before we get to the deep part of football and the betting of Ohio State, what are some general nuggets or little words in sports betting? Maybe there's somebody listening or watching that doesn't know about the handicapping and all the phraseology that goes into sports betting. What are some general things that you think viewers that don't know about it should know before we go any further?
Well, we could spend about a half hour on that. And I'll tell you the truth. We have a tutorial at VSiN.com, VSIN.com. So if you want to study up on the basics of sports betting, we have stories on there, videos on there you can watch if you want to learn more about it. But, just the basic things I had probably taught my mom about 30 years ago about the point spread and the money line and betting first halves, betting totals, things like that. If Ohio State's playing Michigan and Ohio State's a 10-point favorite, the Buckeyes are not going to lose to Michigan. They never do. But you're not sure if they're going to cover the 10 points, and you want to bet the money line. Let's say the money line is minus 750. That means you have to bet $750 to win 100. If you laid the 10 points, you could bet $110 to win 100, but they have to win by 11 or more. Those are just the basic things I explain to people sometimes who don't understand. Now, I think most people are starting to pick up on how to bet sports and certain things like that. I'm probably better. I've been doing this so long. I'm not very good at teaching the basics. I need people to ask me basic questions to explain it, if you know what I mean.
I do. I definitely do. As you look at the Ohio State season, football team from a betting wise, what are some first things that pop into your head about this football team and the schedule that's about to start on September 2nd?
I'm fascinated by the early part of the schedule because the Buckeyes obviously lost 10 players to the NFL draft, and that's tied for most in college football with Alabama. The previous year, Ohio State lost 9 players to the draft, but we know how well Urban Meyer and Ryan Day have recruited, and that program never rebuilds. It just reloads year after year, so you can't focus on the guys who are lost because the guys coming in next are going to be just as good and sometimes better. I mean, that one of the best college teams I've seen in the past 10 years was that Zeke Elliott, Joey Bosa team. And the Buckeyes just boat raced Alabama in the playoffs that year and embarrassed Oregon. That was a great Ohio State team. But not to say that the Buckeyes can't build a better team because Ryan Day is recruiting at a phenomenal level right now. But when I look at the schedule, I still think the early part might be a little troublesome just because the Buckeyes are going on the road to face a Minnesota team that's got a lot of experience in week one. And Ohio State's about a 13.5, 14-point favorite in that game. So obviously the odds makers don't think it's going to be a sweat. But when I look at Minnesota, I do see one of the elite quarterbacks in the conference. He's not necessarily a big-time NFL prospect, but Tanner Morgan is a pretty good quarterback. And Minnesota's got 20 starters back this season, 10 on each side of the ball. Now, we thought Minnesota was going to be pretty good last year. The Gophers were off, I think, an 11-2 season, in 2019. And they got run out by Michigan in that week one game. And they thought, well, maybe the Wolverines are better than we all thought. Well, the Wolverines turned out to be pretty weak last season. and the Gophers were a big disappointment. But still, when the Buckeyes have to go on the road and lay 2 touchdowns in that opener against a team with 20 starters back and a pretty good quarterback and a pretty good coach, I don't think you can take that game lightly. And then you come home to Columbus the next week and face Oregon, which is one of the favorites in the Pac-12 in Columbus. I don't think the Buckeyes are going to lose that game in the horseshoe, but it might not be, a walk in the park on that Saturday afternoon because the Ducks have some serious talent too. Ohio State's not going to lose that game to Oregon, but it could be more difficult than it looks on paper right now. So when you're breaking in a new quarterback and C.J. Stroud, I'm pretty confident it's going to be the starter. He's a kid with a ton of ability. I was actually going through the names of some of the Ohio State quarterbacks of the past, let's say 20 years or so. You look at J.T. Barrett, Braxton Miller, Terrell Pryor, Troy Smith, Dwayne Haskins, Cardale Jones. A lot of these guys who were great athletes never really made it at the NFL level. But that doesn't matter because we're talking about college football, and they're great college quarterbacks. I don't know what C.J. Stroud's potential is going to be. And by the way, Justin Fields might end up being the best of them all. I know there's a lot of hype in Chicago right now about what he can do for the Bears. And I'm really high on Justin Fields as well. But can C.J. Stroud be as good as Justin Fields? Can he be a little bit better? I don't know. I haven't seen enough of him to say. But when you have a new quarterback like that, it's not easy to go on the road against an experienced team in week 1 and come home and play Oregon, one of the favorites in the Pac-12 in week 2. So I think the Buckeyes might have to sweat a little bit in the first couple weeks. It's not going to be as easy as some people might think. And this team is loaded up, probably the best wide receiver core in the country. And Ohio State, when it's all said and done, should be there in the playoff. But like I said, I don't think every game's going to be a blowout. Jay, even if you go back to last season, Ohio State had a tough time with Indiana in that game at Columbus. And, the final score is not necessarily going to show it, but the Hoosiers were right there with the Buckeyes for a long time. So I'm, in the big picture, really optimistic that Ohio State's going to be a playoff team. But the schedule, especially early, I don't think is easy.
No, I don't either. And I'm interested that you mentioned the Indiana game. That game this year is October 23rd. Last year, the way that it ended and the way that fourth quarter went. But the game's October 23rd, coming off of a bye. Estimated line about 9. I look at now 9.5. That game this year could easily be closer. Could be like the game was last year at the end of that game when Indiana started to come back. And it could just be a blowout because you give that team, the Buckeyes, 2 weeks to prepare for that opponent. Michael Penix Jr., I believe, will play better. I'm not the biggest Michael Penix Jr. fan. Well, I think he's good. Don't get me wrong. I think he's good. Right. I don't think he's as good as what the hype says he is. But that game right there could be tricky for the Buckeyes because the Hoosiers are looking to not just win at home, but make a statement in the Big Ten against the power in the Big Ten, the Buckeyes, and say, we know what happened last year. We're going to get you at home this year. Probably a sold-out crowd. The Buckeyes, 2 weeks to prepare for that team. 9.5 might be a little too wide for some.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it's hard to project that at this point, but you're right, those lines are up. So if you want to look ahead at what the point spreads are projected to be, you can certainly check that out. I think that what you said about Michael Penix is the same thing I've been saying for over a year, and I hear people hype him up all the time. Michael Penix is like a superstar. I'm not that crazy about him. I think he lacks passing accuracy. And I don't think he's as good as the hype. And another thing about the Hoosiers, they were lucky last year. Let's put it this way. Everything bounced their way. They lost that game to Penn State at home.
Yeah.
That game was taken away from the Nittany Lions all with that bad call down by the goal line, and also James Franklin just being a buffoon at the end and not knowing how to manage in-game situations. Indiana kind of got things rolling after that Penn State game, which was a gift. This year, the Hoosiers are the hunted, and not necessarily the hunter. Obviously, they will be the hunter in the Ohio State game, but they're not going to sneak up on people this year. Let's put it that way. And when teams that have consistently been losing programs have that one big year, and then all of a sudden expectations become high, and everybody expects a lot of times those teams disappoint that year. And I think Indiana might be headed for a little bit of a disappointment this year because I'm not as high as a lot of people on Penix, and I don't think things are going to bounce their way. consistently like they did last year for the Hoosiers. By the way, the season win total for Indiana, this is just regular season games, not including, a conference championship game or a bowl game, is 8. I would play Indiana under 8. Some books are dropping that number to 7.5, but Indiana would have to go 9-3 to beat you on that bet, and that's not going to happen. You look at the Big Ten schedule, Indiana's not going to go 9-3, and the Buckeyes are not going to get beat by Indiana at that point. I think the good thing about Ohio State, they're going to have a little time to develop an offensive identity and get some of those guys some experience, and they should be rolling by that point. And I would probably, at this point, I would say I would bet Ohio State or pass.
The following week, Ohio State plays Penn State, the Nittany Lions. That game is at home this year in the Horseshoe. And Penn State, you mentioned how they started the season last year and how they played last year. Penn State's looking to come into Columbus and really make some noise. And James Franklin is a guy that is trying to remind people of what happened, where I think he went 11-2, 3 out of 4 seasons. So he has had success in Penn State. It's just of late it hasn't been there. And just like Tom Allen the week prior, these coaches are looking at Ohio State, not just a benchmark or the gold standard, but they're saying we can use this game to propel our players to really show we can play with anybody. I think I saw somewhere the line right now, early line 12.5, maybe 12 or 13. I would expect Ohio State to be a 2-touchdown favorite by that time in the season. Early on, I don't know if you want to touch this game. What are your thoughts about that one?
Well, Penn State's kind of a tricky one to talk about right now because I think the team's got some potential to be pretty good. I look at the offense and I see a lot of positives. Sean Clifford's a pretty good quarterback. They're loaded at the running back and wide receiver positions. So I think the Nittany Lions are going to be able to move the ball and put points on the board. The one thing is I just don't like James Franklin in big games. I especially don't like him against a superior coach like Ryan Day, or Urban Meyer in the past. So I think James Franklin is a really poor game manager, and he finds ways to lose close games a lot of times. We've seen that plenty in the Ohio State-Penn State series. Aside from that, was it Ohio State lost one in the Happy Valley on a blocked kick return, right? What was that, 3-4 years ago? I can't recall exactly when it was. But otherwise, Buckeyes dominated that series. Ohio State will win the game. Like I said, I'm not into laying a lot of points with favorites, even teams like Ohio State that are powerful. So, like I said, the Buckeyes will win the game. I would say that would be a stay away for me at this point because I do think Penn State can be a little bit better than people think, but I don't like to bet on James Franklin teams in big games.
Do you see any games on the schedule that you would hop all over the line now in the future that you're saying, well, the Buckeyes and this opponent, I see where the money is going right now. I'm going to take this one every single day?
It's tough for me to answer that question because I'm more of an underdog player.
Okay.
I like to take points with dogs. Like a few years ago, I took 14 with Purdue in that game against Ohio State in West Lafayette.
Oh, man, you had to do it.
Well, that was one of those spots where you kind of felt like the Buckeyes were rolling at that point. Purdue might catch them sleeping a little bit. And I did think that Ohio State team was showing some cracks going into that game. And, Purdue caught them at the right time. That was a prime time game. They were fired up. That was the game of the year. That was Purdue's Super Bowl that night. And that's what you look for a lot of times. Remember when the Buckeyes got blown out in Iowa City the previous year? Every team circles Ohio State on the schedule as the game of the year, basically. And if I can take a lot of points with a dog that I think is going to be live, a lot of times I'll be betting against Ohio State, but I'll be taking a lot of points. And I don't like to lay a lot of points. I'm not a big favorite player. I think the one spot where I'd probably look to right now, where I'd probably look to play Ohio State would be against Michigan. If you said I had to bet on Ohio State in one game, I'd play the Buckeyes against the Wolverines because I know Ryan Day and Jim Harbaugh hate each other. And Ryan Day is not going to let off the gas pedal when he gets Jim Harbaugh down. So right now, if I had to lay the points in one Ohio State game, it would be against Michigan. What is it, 16-1 in the last 17, Jay?
Yeah, I think you're about right. I've kind of lost track myself. I know Harbaugh hasn't won, and that's the one thing we're riding right now. But it has been. I mean, under Meyer, I think the last time they won was when Fickle was in like 2011, when Fickle was a head coach during that probation year. I could be wrong about that, but I feel like that was the last time that they've actually won a game, because under Urban dominated a lot. Ryan Day's been dominating as well. But it's interesting because you mentioned the Michigan game. I was going to mention that one next. I don't know if Michigan puts it together at all in the way that they want to bounce back from how they played last year. Ultimately, they played the Buckeyes at the end of the season, and it's tricky going into for the Michigan football team trying to predict what they'll be, but it's also trickier trying to see how many points Ohio State will score this year against that team.
You know, it's Jim Harbaugh reworked his defensive coaching staff. Obviously, that defense has been an embarrassment.
Yeah.
Ohio State dropped, I was going to say 2 years ago, Ohio State dropped 56 points on Michigan. In the previous year, 62. And the year was 62-39. I really felt like Ohio State could have scored 80-plus in that game. Actually kind of took it easy on the Wolverines. I was trying to check my record book here. I've got 15 of the last 16 and 8 straight for Ohio State against Michigan. Is that what you got? 15-1 and 8 straight.
8 straight. I know it's been at least 5 in a row. 8 straight sounds familiar.
Okay. I got 15-1 in the last 16. Let's put it that way. Well, the thing with Michigan, Jim Harbaugh hasn't really had a dynamic quarterback. We thought it was Shea Patterson might be that guy. He was a number 1 recruit out of high school before he went to Ole Miss. He transfers to Michigan. He wasn't that good. And he really wasn't good in big games. Right now you got Cade McNamara, Alan Bowman, the transfer from Texas Tech, and J.J. McCarthy, who's a 5-star recruit. Are one of those guys going to step up and be a dynamic player, maybe a Justin Fields type of player? Who knows? Harbaugh's got to find a dynamic quarterback or he doesn't have a chance. First of all, his play calling is too conservative. His defenses have been bad the last couple of years, especially when Michigan can be a bully sometimes, beat up on bad teams, and then when they step up in competition, the Wolverines get hammered. I'm trying to be somewhat optimistic about this Michigan team because of if they can find a quarterback out of those 3 guys I mentioned, and you see some positives there. One of those guys could step up and be a really good quarterback. I think Michigan could maybe exceed some expectations, but the Wolverines are not on Ohio State's level, not close right now. I think the Buckeyes, when I break down the Big Ten, I've got Ohio State as 6 points better on the power rating than the second best team in the conference. And that right now, that's Wisconsin. Wisconsin and Penn State right there as the second best team, and 6 points might be conservative. Ohio State might be even better than that. I just generally am a little bit conservative early in the season when you have a new quarterback. And, it's not the Justin Fields offense right now. It's the C.J. Stroud offense, which might be fine. It might be a high-powered offense, but until I see it in action, I'm not going to bump up that Ohio State power rating any higher than what I have. But right now it's Ohio State head and shoulders above the pack, and we'll see if Wisconsin and Penn State can step up and compete. But I don't even have Michigan in that second tier right now. I got Michigan kind of as a middle-of-the-pack Big Ten team.
Last question for you. Do you see a way, because I've heard there's been a lot of hype for Iowa this offseason. Do you see a way for Iowa to meet Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis?
Did you say meet or beat?
Meet, not beat. I'm not going that far.
I was going to say. Yeah, there's a way because the Big Ten West is just not that strong. A lot of the teams are very similar. I'm not even sure Wisconsin, how good Wisconsin is right now because we don't know about Graham Mertz. Everybody wanted to make Graham Mertz a Heisman candidate when he was 20 for 21 with 5 touchdown passes against Illinois last year in that opener, and he threw 4 TD passes the entire season after that. So I'm not sure how good Mertz is going to be. I think the Badgers are going to bounce back and be pretty good, probably the class of the West. But is Minnesota going to step up? Iowa step up? I'm not so sure. Northwestern's got the fewest returning starters in the conference at 8. So I don't think Northwestern's going to be there again. Nebraska's got too far to go to step up. Illinois is rebuilding, even though Brett Bielema is probably going to turn that thing around a little bit quicker than most people think. And Purdue's still got a long way to go under Jeff Brom to get up into contention in the West. I think it's Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota. I just don't like Spencer Petras, the quarterback for the Hawkeyes, all that much. And when I look at Kirk Ferentz, sometimes I wonder how he does it every year. You look down at the end of the year. Iowa started last season 0-2, and there was a lot of off-field turmoil, a lot of talk that, hey, this might be it for Kirk Ferentz. This could be his last year. This could be his worst season. And Iowa finishes 6-2, and somehow does it. When I look at the Hawkeyes on paper, I just don't see it right now. That's why I was looking to play under the win total for Iowa for the season. I think it's Wisconsin or Minnesota out of the West. And that first game, that Ohio State-Minnesota game, is going to tell us a lot.
I think so as well. Matt, this has been a lot of fun. If you can, let everyone know where they can connect with you on Twitter and also where they can listen to my guys in the desert as well.
Jay, appreciate the time. It's always great to talk Big Ten football. You can find us at VSIN.com, VSiN.com, at VSiN Live on Twitter, or at Matt Youmans 247 on Twitter.
Guys, this has been fun. Matt, thank you so much for coming on. Hopefully we can get you back on at some time during the season to talk some more Big Ten football, Ohio State specific, as we all know. Thank you for coming on Locked on Buckeyes. I really appreciate it.
You bet, Jay. Thanks.
And that's all she wrote. Very happy that Matt Youmans from the Vegas Sports Information Network, the senior editor of that network, could join us to talk Big Ten football, to talk something that he loves, and we had so much fun doing it. Even had a little bit longer of a conversation at the end of our interview, discussing things that are going on around college football. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at JStevens07. If you miss Matt Youmans' Twitter handle, it's at Matt Youmans 247, YOUMANS 247. Give him a follow. You'll thoroughly enjoy it. Come back tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. A lot to talk about as we gear up for the first game week, the first game of the season, which is September 2nd against the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Have a great day, guys. And as always, go Bucks!